My name is Alice Rowe. I'm a librarian, a profession that suits the quiet corners of my soul. I live in a small, second-story apartment in Port Blossom, a city that perpetually smells of damp earth and roses, where the sky is more often a soft, pearlescent gray than a brilliant blue. My world is one of ordered shelves, the gentle rustle of turning pages, and the low hum of a community seeking knowledge or escape. It's a life I built for myself, a sanctuary of quiet intention, far from the beautiful, echoing rooms of the house I grew up in. It begins, as it always does, with the scent of my mother's roast chicken. That scent is the prelude to every family gathering, a fragrant promise of both comfort and a familiar, low-grade tension. Sunday dinner at my parents' house is less a meal and more a carefully staged play, one we've been performing for over 40 years. The set is always the same. The heavy mahogany dining table polished to a fearsome shine, the lace placemats she inherited from her own mother, the silver that only sees the light of day for these occasions. We, the actors, know our roles by heart. My father, a man who has learned that silence is a form of armor, presides from the head of the table, his presence more atmospheric than active. He carves the chicken with a surgeon's precision, a task he performs with a focused gravity that allows him to avoid the cross-currents of conversation. My mother, Alara, flits between the kitchen and the dining room, her movements a whirlwind of feigned ease, her smile a beautiful, brittle thing. And then there is my sister, Chloe. Chloe arrives like a sunbeam breaking through the city's persistent cloud cover. She doesn't just enter a room, she illuminates it. Tonight, she is wearing a cashmere sweater the color of a robin's egg, and her blonde hair is a halo around her impeccably made-up face. Her husband, Mark, is on a business trip, a convenient excuse that has become a running theme. I suspect he finds these dinners as taxing as I do, though he has the luxury of a socially acceptable exit. I sit opposite Chloe, feeling, as I always do, like a study in muted tones next to her vibrant palette. I am the older sister, the quiet one, the reliable one. I am the one who remembers birthdays, drives my mother to her doctor's appointments, and listens patiently on the phone while she details the latest minor drama at her garden club. I am the steady, unremarkable bedrock upon which the more dazzling family monuments are built. Alice, dear, you're looking tired, my mother says as she places a bowl of mashed potatoes on the table. It's not a question, it's a diagnosis. A subtle reminder that I am not glowing like Chloe, who has just returned from a yoga retreat in the wine country. Just a busy week at the library, Mom, I reply, my voice even. We're preparing for the summer reading program. Oh, that's nice, she says, her attention already shifting. Chloe, tell your father about the new artisan you found for the boutique. The one who makes those divine little ceramic birds. And so it goes. Chloe, an effortless raconteur, tells the story of her discovery. Her boutique, Juniper and Lark, is the darling of Port Blossom's more affluent residents, a curated collection of handcrafted jewelry, organic textiles, and whimsical home goods. It is, in every way, a reflection of Chloe herself, tasteful, successful, and endlessly praised. My father nods along, making appreciative noises. My mother's gaze is fixed on her, her expression one of pure, unadulterated adoration. I eat my chicken, which is, as always, slightly dry. I take a sip of water. I listen to the story of the ceramic birds, and then a story about a feature on Juniper and Lark in a local magazine, and then an anecdote about a city councilman's wife who has become a devoted customer. I am an audience member at the Chloe Show, a role I have played my entire life. I don't resent Chloe's success. I truly don't. I am proud of the beautiful life she has built. What I resent, in the quietest, most deeply buried part of myself, is the way her light has always been used to cast me in shadow. It's not that my accomplishments are ignored, it's that they are treated as quaint hobbies, gentle pastimes that are pleasant but ultimately unimportant in the grand scheme of the family's narrative. My master's degree in library science, my position as head of acquisitions, the community programs I've built from the ground up, they are nice. Chloe's new line of Italian linen scarves is an event. The moment comes, as it always does, near the end of the meal. My mother places her fork and knife neatly across her plate, a signal that a pronouncement is forthcoming. She smiles, a soft, wistful expression, and looks first at Chloe, then around the table, her eyes skipping over me as if I were part of the furniture. You know, she begins, her voice imbued with a gentle solemnity. I was looking at old photographs the other day. From when you girls were little. She reaches across the table and places her hand over Chloe's. And I was thinking, you were always the one who just shone. You carry the light for this family, Chloe. You always have. The words hang in the air, shimmering and beautiful and exquisitely cruel. My father shifts in his chair, his gaze dropping to his plate. Chloe blushes, a perfect, modest pink. Oh, Mom, don't be silly, she murmurs, but she doesn't pull her hand away. I feel nothing and everything at once. It's not a fresh wound, it's the pressing of a bruise so old it's become a part of my body's landscape. It's the quiet confirmation of a truth I've always known but have never been allowed to say aloud. In the constellation of our family, Chloe is the sun, and I am a distant, forgotten moon. I exist only to reflect a fraction of her light. I continue to chew a piece of overcooked green bean. I swallow. I take another sip of water. For years, my response to these moments has been to retreat further into myself, to become smaller, quieter, to make my silence a shield. But tonight, something is different. A fine, almost invisible thread inside me, stretched taut for 4 decades, finally snaps. It doesn't make a sound, but I feel the release in every cell of my body. I place my napkin on the table. That was a lovely dinner, Mom, I say, my voice surprisingly steady. I stand and begin to gather the empty plates. Let me help with these. Chloe gives me a look of faint, sisterly gratitude. Thanks, Alice. You're the best. In the kitchen, I scrape leftover potatoes into the compost bin with a calm, deliberate rhythm. The water runs hot over the plates as I rinse them, the steam warming my face. My mother follows me in, humming a cheerful, tuneless melody as she starts to put away the leftover chicken. She acts as if nothing has happened, as if her words were as inconsequential as commenting on the weather. And that, I realize, is the heart of it. To her, it was an inconsequential statement. A simple fact. I turn off the water and dry my hands on a dish towel. I wait until she has closed the refrigerator door and turned to face me. The hum dies in her throat as she sees the expression on my face. I'm not angry. I'm not hurt. I am simply still. I lean forward, just enough so that my voice won't carry back to the dining room. It's a quiet voice, the voice I use for storytelling hour with the children at the library, but it holds a new and unfamiliar weight. It's all right, Mom, I say softly. I learned a long time ago not to stand in Chloe's light. It's easier for everyone that way. Her smile freezes, then slowly dissolves. I see a flicker of confusion in her eyes, then a dawning awareness, like someone realizing the ground beneath their feet isn't as solid as they believed. It's not the shock of a direct blow, but the slow, creeping dread of a truth that has been let loose in the house. I give her a small, sad smile. Thank you for dinner. I walk out of the kitchen, not waiting for a response. I give my father's shoulder a light squeeze as I pass him. He looks up at me, his eyes filled with a familiar, helpless sadness. I offer Chloe a brief wave and let myself out the front door, into the cool, damp embrace of the port blossom night. The air smells of wet pavement and the sweet, cloying scent of daphne from a neighbor's garden. The porch light buzzes overhead, a frantic moth batting against the glass. As I walk to my car, I feel a strange sense of lightness, as if I've just set down a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying my entire life. I haven't won a battle. I haven't vanquished an enemy. I have simply spoken my truth, quietly and without apology, for the very first time. Back in my apartment, I don't turn on the lights. I slide my phone into airplane mode, silencing the inevitable barrage before it can begin. I pour myself a glass of deep, dark Cabernet I'd been saving for a special occasion, though I hadn't known this would be it. I sit in my favorite armchair by the window, watching the city lights blur through the rain-streaked glass. I don't feel anger. I don't feel triumph. I feel a vast, clean emptiness. A quiet space has opened up inside me, A room that has been cleared of old, suffocating furniture, waiting to be filled with something new. Something of my own. The silence of my apartment the next morning was a stark contrast to the storm brewing on my phone. When I finally switched it off airplane mode, it shuddered to life with a cascade of notifications. 3 missed calls from my father. 5 from Chloe. A string of texts. Chloe, Mom is a wreck. She won't come out of her room. What on earth did you say to her? Chloe, Alice, this isn't funny. Call me. Dad, your mother is very upset. I think you should call her. Even a text from my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, who usually only communicates via a mass-forwarded email on holidays. Ilara is heartbroken. I hope whatever happened can be fixed. They were acting as if I had thrown a wine glass against the wall, screamed obscenities, overturned the dinner table. But my weapon hadn't been rage, it had been a quiet sentence of truth. And in a family that runs on the fuel of unspoken agreements and carefully maintained illusions, the truth is a more terrifying thing than anger. Anger can be dismissed as a tantrum. Truth has to be reckoned with. I made a pot of French press coffee, the rich, dark aroma filling my small kitchen. I watered my collection of ferns and succulents, their silent, green vitality a comfort. I resisted the urge to reply, to defend, to explain. Explaining would be a trap. It would pull me back into their narrative, where my feelings would be debated, minimized, and ultimately invalidated in the service of restoring a false peace. I had spent a lifetime doing that. I was not going to do it today. Growing up as the quiet child, the observer, you learn to read the air in a room. You become an expert in the subtle language of sighs, the inflection of a seemingly innocent question, the meaning of a gaze that lingers a second too long or, more tellingly, doesn't linger at all. I was the family's emotional caretaker, the one who smoothed things over. When Chloe, as a teenager, would have a screaming match with our mother, I would be the one to bring Mom a cup of tea afterward, to murmur soothing platitudes until the storm passed. When my father would retreat into one of his stony silences, I would be the one to draw him out with gentle questions about his garden or the book he was reading. I was the keeper of the family's fragile equilibrium, and my own needs were the price of admission. Around noon, my phone rang again. It was Mark, Chloe's husband. He never calls me. I am the designated dog sitter, the emergency contact, the reliable sister-in-law who can be counted on in a pinch, but we do not have a relationship that involves casual phone calls. I let it ring, but he called back immediately. A double call. The universal sign for, this is not a drill. I sighed and answered. Alice, he said, his voice tight with a forced, corporate politeness. Listen, I know this is none of my business, but Chloe is really losing it. She says your mom has locked herself in her bedroom and won't speak to anyone. She's worried sick. I looked out my window at a cluster of pigeons huddled on the roof opposite. Mark, what exactly does Chloe want me to do? I asked, my voice calm. There was a pause. He was expecting hysterics, or at least a defensive explanation. My composure seemed to throw him off script. Well, I mean, maybe just call her? Apologize? Whatever it was you said, it clearly went too far. What I said, I replied, my eyes tracing the intricate pattern of the brickwork across the street, was that I have learned not to stand in Chloe's light. That's it. That was the whole sentence. Another pause, this one longer. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head as he tried to fit that sentence into the narrative of me as the villain. Okay, well, you know how your mom can be. She's sensitive. She is, I agreed. And for 40 years, I have been the one to tiptoe around that sensitivity. I've decided to stop tiptoeing. Alice, he started, his tone shifting toward exasperation. Mark, I interrupted, gently but firmly. I appreciate you calling. I know you're in a difficult position. But this is between my mother, my sister, and me. It's been brewing for a very long time, and it needs to run its course. After we hung up, I sank into my armchair, the coffee in my mug now cold. I didn't feel powerful or vindicated. I just felt weary. The sheer, bone-deep exhaustion of having to finally advocate for a space that should have been freely given. My mind drifted back through the years, collecting memories like stones from a riverbed. I remembered my 8th grade graduation. I had won the school's top award for English. I was so proud, clutching the little plaque in my hands all the way home. When I walked in the door, the house was in a flurry of activity. Chloe, then 10, had just been chosen as the lead in her ballet recital, and my mother was on the phone, excitedly telling relatives the news. My award was met with a distracted, "Oh, that's wonderful, honey, put it on the mantelpiece," before her attention snapped right back to Chloe's triumph. My plaque sat on the mantelpiece for a week before it was moved to my bedroom to make room for a framed photo of Chloe in her tutu. I remembered when I was a junior in high school. I had been offered a full scholarship to the prestigious Hadley School of Design on the East Coast. It was a dream I had secretly nurtured, a future where I could be the one who shone, surrounded by color and creation. I showed my mother the acceptance letter, my hands trembling. She read it, and her face fell. She didn't tell me I couldn't go. She did something far more effective. She began to talk about how anxious she was, how Chloe was going through a rebellious phase and was so difficult to handle, how my father was so busy at work, how she didn't know what she would do without her steady, sensible Alice at home to keep things on an even keel. She made my dream sound like an act of abandonment. And so I stayed. I went to the local university, got my degree, and folded my dream away like a letter you never send. Chloe, of course, went to an expensive private college out of state 2 years later, an event that was celebrated with a lavish going-away party. All these moments, these tiny cuts and large wounds, had taught me a lesson. My needs were secondary. My dreams were inconvenient. My role was to support, to enable, to applaud from the wings. And last night, I had simply walked off the stage. No wonder they were all in a panic. The leading lady can't shine without a stage crew. I thought about texting Chloe back a sharp, cutting reply. Maybe Mom is crying because, for the first time, she has to look at the space where I'm supposed to be. But I didn't. The silence was more powerful. It was my space now, and I would not let them rush in to fill it with their noise, their demands, their version of reality. For the first time, I was letting the silence speak for itself. And I had a feeling it had a great deal to say. The knock on my apartment door 2 days later was unmistakable. It wasn't the hesitant rap of a delivery person or the cheerful rhythm of my neighbor. It was 3 sharp, impatient raps, the sound of someone who believes their presence commands immediate attention. It was Chloe. I knew she would come. The silence had become too much for her to bear, a void where her power had no purchase. She needed a confrontation, a scene, a moment where she could reassert her role as the righteous, aggrieved party, and I could be put back in my box as the difficult, oversensitive one. I took a deep, calming breath before I walked to the door. I didn't open it right away. I stood for a moment, my hand on the cool metal of the doorknob, and I centered myself. I thought of the sturdy, ancient oaks in the park near the library, their roots deep in the earth, unswayed by the passing storms. That was who I needed to be right now. Rooted. When I opened the door, she was standing there, jaw tight, her designer handbag clutched in her hand like a weapon. Her face was a mask of strained concern. "Can I come in?" she asked, though it was more of a statement as she brushed past me into my living room. My apartment, which to me is a haven of warmth and personality, walls lined with books, clusters of thriving plants, textiles from my travels, always seems to confound Chloe. She looked around with a faint, pitying expression, as if my life were a quaint, slightly sad diorama. "You have no idea what you've done, do you?" she began, turning to face me. She didn't pace like a caged animal. Her style was more composed, the anger simmering beneath a layer of icy control. "Mom is a complete mess. She's barely eating. Dad said he heard her crying in the middle of the night. All because you couldn't just have one normal family dinner without making some kind of scene." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. I didn't say anything. I let her words hang in the air, let their accusations fill the space between us. I have learned that people who are used to controlling the narrative will often talk themselves into a corner if you give them enough silence. It was one comment, "Alice," she continued, her voice rising slightly. "One little thing she said because she's proud of me. Why do you have to take everything so personally? Why does it always have to be about you?" There it was. The foundational accusation of my entire life. Why does it have to be about you? As if my feelings, my experiences, my very existence were a selfish indulgence. Because for once, I said, my voice quiet but unyielding it was. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up. What is that supposed to mean? It means, I said, walking slowly towards the bookshelf that served as a rune divider, that for 40 years, it has never been about me. And I finally realized that I am the only one who is going to change that. I stopped in front of a small, decorative wooden box on one of the shelves. A box Chloe had never seen me open. You talk about what I've done, I said, my back to her. But do you have any idea what I've given up? For you? For this family? Oh, here we go, she scoffed, the practiced sound of dismissal. Don't you dare try to play the martyr, Alice. Everything I have, I've worked for. My business, my home. I didn't take anything from you. I opened the box. Inside were the carefully preserved relics of a life I never lived. I pulled out the thick, cream-colored envelope, the paper still crisp after all these years. I turned and held it out to her. The Hadley School of Design, I said. Full artistic scholarship. Room and board included. I was 18. She took the letter, her eyes scanning the page. I saw a flicker of confusion, a momentary crack in her armor of certainty. I don't remember this. Of course you don't, I said, my voice devoid of bitterness. It was simply a fact. You were too busy being a teenager, and Mom was too busy being worried about you. She told me she couldn't handle me leaving. That she needed me. So I stayed. She looked up from the letter, her expression unreadable. She asked you not to go? She never had to ask, I said. She was much more clever than that. She just made me feel like my dreams would be the thing that broke her. So I folded them up and put them in a box. I reached back into the box and pulled out a small, faded photograph. It was of the two of us, when I was 16 and she was 14. We were standing in front of my first car, a dent clearly visible in the passenger side door. Do you remember this? I asked, handing her the photo. You took my car without asking, went joyriding with your friends, and clipped Mrs. Gable's mailbox. You came home crying, terrified of what Dad would do. You begged me to take the blame. She stared at the photo, her face paling. She stammered. That was a long time ago. I told them I misjudged the turn into the driveway, I said, my voice still quiet, a narrator recounting a story from long ago. I was grounded for a month. I lost my driving privileges for the entire summer. You never said a word. For the first time in her life, Chloe was speechless. There was no witty retort, no defensive maneuver, no graceful pivot. She just stood there, holding the evidence of a past she had conveniently forgotten, a past where my sacrifices were the invisible scaffolding that supported her charmed life. The things I said to Mom the other night weren't an attack, Chloe, I said, walking towards the door and opening it for her. They were just a receipt. A final tally of the cost of being the quiet one. She walked to the doorway, her movements slow, uncertain. She paused on the threshold and turned back to me, her eyes shimmering with something I couldn't quite name, anger, guilt, confusion. What do you want from us, Alice? An apology? Money? What will it take to make this right? I almost smiled. She still thought it was a transaction, something that could be settled and filed away. I don't want anything from you, I said, and the truth of that statement resonated deep within me. I just want you to remember. I closed the door gently behind her, the click of the latch soft but final. I stood in the silence of my apartment, a silence that was no longer empty but full. It was filled with the presence of a woman who was finally, after a lifetime of waiting, taking up her own space in the world. The days that followed were a study in silence. A thick, profound quiet settled over my life, a stark departure from the usual low-level hum of familial obligation. There were no more frantic texts from Chloe, no more sorrowful voicemails from my father. It was as if by speaking the truth, I had created a rupture in the fabric of our universe, and they had all retreated to their corners, unsure of how to navigate this new, unmapped territory. At first, the silence was a balm. I reveled in it. I went for long walks along the waterfront, watching the ferries glide across the gray water of the Puget Sound. I spent an entire Saturday lost in the labyrinthine aisles of a used bookstore, emerging hours later with a stack of treasures and ink-smudged fingers. I cooked elaborate meals for myself, playing music loud in my kitchen, dancing between the counter and the stove. I was rediscovering the contours of my own life, a life that wasn't defined by the needs or expectations of others. But as the silence stretched from 3 days into a week, a different feeling began to surface. It wasn't loneliness or regret. It was a dawning, somber understanding. The silence wasn't a truce, it was a strategy. In a family like mine, direct confrontation is avoided at all costs. Problems aren't solved, they are outlasted. I realized they were waiting for me to break, to grow uncomfortable with the quiet and come back into the fold, ready to resume my role as the family's designated peacekeeper, perhaps with a few new, unspoken rules of engagement. They were waiting for me to miss them more than I valued myself. That was when I decided to write the letter. It wasn't an act of aggression or a plea for understanding. It was an act of personal archaeology. I needed to document the truth for myself, to lay out the facts, not the emotions, in the stark clarity of black ink on white paper. I sat at my small wooden desk, a cup of chamomile tea steaming beside me, and I wrote. It was not a letter of accusation. It was a list. October 1996, when you told our family friends that I was the one who broke Grandma's porcelain vase because Chloe was already in trouble for failing her math test. I said nothing. June 2002, my graduation from the university. You missed the ceremony because Chloe had a fender bender, and you said she was too distraught to be left alone. You sent Dad with a camera. When I look at the photos, I see his sadness for me. August 2009, my wedding. A small, simple ceremony at the courthouse, which was all I could afford. You told me it was sweet, but later complained to Aunt Carol that it lacked a sense of occasion. At Chloe's wedding a year later, you gave a toast where you wept with joy and called it the happiest day of your life. Winter 2017, during your cancer scare, I drove you to every single appointment and sat for hours in waiting rooms. When the tests came back clear, you threw a celebration of life dinner and told everyone that Chloe's constant, cheerful phone calls were what got you through. You never mentioned the drives. I filled 2 pages with these moments, these quiet erosions of my spirit. Each one was a small stone, but together they had built a mountain that had blocked my sun. At the bottom of the last page, I wrote one final sentence. I never wanted to be more than her. I just wanted to be seen, too. I folded the pages, slid them into a simple envelope, and wrote my mother's name on the front. I didn't put a return address. This wasn't the opening of a dialogue. It was the closing of a book. Late that night, I drove to my parents' house, the streets of their quiet, manicured neighborhood slick with rain. I slipped the letter into their mailbox, the metal slot cool and final against my fingertips. As I drove away, I didn't feel relief or vindication. I felt a quiet sense of rightness, of an account finally being settled, not with them, but within myself. 3 more days of silence followed. I began to believe that was the end of it, that my letter would be read and then buried, another uncomfortable truth to be ignored into oblivion. But on the 4th morning, something was different. Slipped under my apartment door was an envelope. It was thick, heavy, made of the same cream-colored cardstock my mother used for her personal stationery. There was no name, no writing on the outside at all. My heart beat a little faster as I picked it up. With a strange sense of reverence, I sat in my armchair and carefully opened it. Inside were not words of anger or apology, but a small collection of old photographs I had never seen. They were all of me. Me as a toddler, sitting in a patch of sunlight in the backyard, looking intently at a ladybug on my finger. Me at 7, holding up a finger painting a proud, gap-toothed smile on my face. Me at 12, sitting in a tree in the park, a book open in my lap, completely lost to the world. In every single one, I was alone. I was the subject. And in every single one, I looked peaceful, content, whole. I didn't know she had kept these. Tucked behind the photos was a single, fragile page, torn from a small, cloth-bound book. I recognized it instantly. It was from the 5-year diary my grandmother had given me when I was 9, the kind with a tiny, useless lock and key. The page was dated on my 10th birthday. My handwriting was a childish, looping scrawl. The entry read, "Today I am 10. Mommy gave Chloe a big party for her birthday. For mine, we had cake after dinner. That is okay. I hope one day she looks at me the way she looks at Chloe. Like she is the whole world." My breath caught in my throat. I had no memory of writing those words, but they resonated with a truth so deep it felt like it was etched onto my bones. It was the thesis statement of my childhood. And then I saw it. Beneath my childish script, written in my mother's elegant, familiar cursive, was a single line of fresh, blue ink. She always did. She just didn't know how to show you. I stared at the page for a long, long time. The photos, the diary entry, her words, it was a peace offering. An explanation. An admission. It was the most honest thing she had ever given me. And yet, a profound, hollow sadness bloomed in my chest. Because it was a beautiful, heartbreaking gesture that had come 20 years too late. It couldn't unwrite the story that had already been lived. It couldn't heal the little girl who learned to make herself small. It could only explain the wound. It couldn't erase the scar. I gathered the photos and the diary page. I walked them to my small kitchen sink. I did not do it with anger or with a desire for dramatic finality. I did it with a quiet, solemn sense of purpose. I lit a match and touched it to the corner of the first photograph. I watched as the flames consumed the images, my mother's words, my childhood wish. I watched them curl and blacken and turn to ash. I was not burning the past. I was releasing myself from the need for it to be different. I was letting go of the hope that she could ever give me what I needed then, and accepting that what I needed now was something only I could give myself: freedom. As the last wisp of smoke curled towards the ceiling, a sense of profound peace settled over me. Not the peace of resolution, but the peace of acceptance. The story with my family was not over, but my role in it had been irrevocably changed. I would no longer be the quiet one in the shadows. I would be Alice. A librarian, a lover of books and quiet mornings, a woman who lived in a small apartment that smelled of paper and plants. A woman who was, finally, learning to carry her own light.